right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Okay, so this is the soil web or food web crash course by McKinley Smoot. I'll just read his bio real quick just to introduce him. McKinley was raised on a cow ranch at the foot of the Uinta Mountains in Utah. McKinley grew up helping his father implement holistic management on family land. McKinley is a partner of 3 Spring Land and Livestock and owner of Living Soil Laboratories, LLC. McKinley is an accredited professional with the Savory Institute and also certified lab tech with the Soil Food Web School. And he is becoming a consultant with the Soil Food Web School as well. So this time we'll turn it over to McKinley. See if we get it to present. How to reload it because it went advanced slides. There we go. All right.
Thanks for that applause. It's great to get that in the morning. Everybody doing good? Everybody have a good evening last night? Enjoying the conference thus far? More or less? Good. Fantastic. Yeah, so I'm McKinley Smoot. Just a little bit more about me. I did grow up at the foot of Uinta Mountains at about, I'm going to take this out. It's a little too tall for it, I think. On a cattle ranch. My dad has been doing holistic resource management, is what it was called way back in the day. Started in the 90s. He learned directly under Alan Savory, so that's really the reason that I even know about any of this, and the reason that I do it. I didn't really know that we were doing that because I just grew up doing managed grazing for that amount of time, and then apparently, at the age of 23, I figured out that was kind of actually a big deal. So, first of all, I'm still learning. We're all still learning. I can't remember the guy's name. He was an ecologist that said, nature is more complex than we think. It's more complex than we can think. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, and I'm pretty convinced that I'm never going to figure it out completely. So any questions, any concerns, or anything like that are greatly appreciated. I would prefer to have this be more of a conversation or discussion. I tend to think things go that better. Well, at least for me, they go better. So we'll get this started. Oh, come on. Here we go. Oh, boy. Oh, we got a little bit of a delay. Yeah, maybe clicking it might be a little better. So we've been messing around with some high tunnels. This is a geothermal greenhouse that we have. We've been growing year-round. Aside from ranching, we've been getting into the more vegetable production side of life. That picture there on the left, yeah, that would be your right, actually, I think, right? On your right, we just started. We had just completed. We put in a cover crop. One thing we did run into really, really quickly is aphids. And we've had about every pest you can imagine. We have aphids, spider mites, whiteflies, fungus gnats. What else we had? Cabbage moths. So and that was due. We didn't really know why. We've been gone no-till, no chemical fertilizers or pesticides, and we've had to figure out how to do this all naturally. And that kind of led us down the road of going to the Soil Food Web School with Dr. Langham. I've been with them for about 3 years now, and we're just about ready to finish up their consultant training program, which has been quite intensive. It's been a really fun journey. I've had to learn a lot of words that I didn't know, and to be honest, those words are not things that anybody needs to know. It's just if you want to, if you're curious, it's kind of fun to figure out what this was actually doing. So that's what it looked like. This was our greenhouse this this was in October. Got a lot of tomatoes and a lot of cucumbers and a lot of citrus in there, which is kind of fun to grow citrus in Utah. This is the photo on your right. That's my dad. He's actually that's a shade haven. That's a big mobile shade structure trying to get our cattle to create a little bit more herd effect and also get them out of underneath certain trees. A lot of our aspen groves are starting to die because the cattle like to hang out there during the warmer parts of the. They like hang out on those trees, and over time, that compaction will we just notice how those trees are going down, and the aspens, the shoots that are coming up are starting to disappear. So, and then I'm also partner Three Springs Land and Livestock. There will be another breakout session with Mitch Dumke, who will be leading that. It's been an honor to do that with those guys. We got our own cattle, we're finishing beef and chickens, and we're just starting to expand. It's been our first year. It's been a really fun journey to start managing a little bit more intensively. Let me play this video. It's kind of fun. Let me make sure there's no sound on that thing. This is our ranch. This is if you ever go up Mirror Lake Highway, there's a valley that the Provo River cuts through. This was in August. We lost our irrigation last year on June 14th, which is the soonest we've ever lost it. We were really lucky. We really tried hard to make sure the animals didn't overgraze. Got a little bit of rain and everything came back. Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be going. Is it going now? Dang it. No, that's okay. It's just a pan to the right. But we were lucky to stay green the whole year. And that's 25 years of holistic management. A lot of that, you can see some rangeland over to the left. That used to be most of the property. And now it's turned into a meadow. It's kind of fun for us to look at that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about soil. Everybody's heard this. A nation destroys its soil, destroys itself. That's FDR. This is, usually you see the pictures of the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl is still occurring in large portions of the United States. And that's just from leaving bare soil, which is a big practice for us. We've spoken about that quite a bit. Lots of empires have fallen. Historians will never say that agriculture was a true fall, but usually it's a pretty serious contributor. And it was interesting. I was talking to, I can't remember who I was talking to. I think it was Marlin 2 days ago, and a lot of these empires that rose usually were farmers. Farmers kind of started these. United States was started by our founders. A lot of them were farmers. Roman Empire, they're known as farmers. The Mongolian Empire, they were herdsmen and stockmen and people who started running animals on the steppe. Egyptians, the Fertile Crescent. A lot of these places are quite unstable, especially the Fertile Crescent. That's where wheat was cultivated for the first time. It was called emmer back in those days. And the fortunate thing about us is we have a lot of synthetic fertilizers, and I'm not advocating that anybody get off fertilizer wholesale like everybody's been talking about. If we did that as a nation in the world, we would see massive famine. But it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for farmers. Everybody here I've talked to said, how do we make this pencil? And we kind of dug ourselves into a big hole. We've been doing a lot of things for a long time, and we're going to talk more about dirt versus soil. And civilization is built on soil, not dirt. We'll get into a little bit of the distinctions about what dirt is in comparison to soil. How's it going? Oh, I'm stuck. Sorry, guys. This starts. PowerPoint doesn't want to work today. I forgot I was presenting at 8:30 actually today, and I just walked in, so we're having a good time today. Okay. Huh. Technology is so fun, guys. I don't like it. Anyway, so anybody here heard of Hans Jenny? So Hans Jenny is the father of soil scientists. He was born in 1899. He died in, I think, 1993. He was kind of the guy that, soil back in the day was built of sand, silts, and clays. And he argued that there was organic matter in there, which is a big deal, which actually became less and less important over time to science. The Green Revolution, there we go. Those are the civilizations I'm talking about, especially this one right here, the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia and Sumeria. Do they have problems today? Are there problems over there? Kind of. Some may say you don't, but I fundamentally contribute that to water and agriculture instability. Really, I mean, that if anybody was anybody at the beginners workshop 2 days ago here, when they did the rain simulator and they had that penny on bare ground. That I'd never seen that part of it. I'd never seen the pen, like, for whatever reason, the other ones I'd seen, they didn't do that. And that's what's, I mean, we're washing away the fabric of civilization underneath our feet. And typically we convert soil to dirt real quickly, and soil builds over millennia this bank account for us, and we come in and start withdrawing pretty quick because it's a lot easier to cultivate that way initially. And then we have to start adding inputs and anyway. So this is Hans Jenny. What is soil? Soil, sand, silts, and clays. That's a parent material. That would be, coming from any kind of rock, any weathering. Weathering occurs not only from the weather, but it also occurs underneath biological pressure. Biological pressure being bacteria and fungi mining these parent materials. And organic matter is part of that. Soil is also organisms, aerobic organisms. A lot of folks, a lot of our soils are not aerobic. They are anaerobic, whether it's because of, plowing. You have that plow pan that can't get air exchange, or compaction, or too much water. In Alabama, they got 22 inches of rain in a month. And you get too much rain, your soils will go anaerobic. And one of the issues that we run into on our ranch, we are totally, we depend on flood irrigation. Flood irrigation, is anybody else running flood irrigation here? Yeah. Anybody have trouble with it sometimes, of getting that water distributed the way you like? Yeah, I do, unless you have really good terrain. A lot of that water can accumulate in certain places, and it changes the actual plant community. If you're looking for Timothy grass or orchard grass, and your water and it starts turning into wiregrass. Wiregrass is a sedge. Sedge doesn't need oxygen in the soil. Where what it does is it takes oxygen. It has a unique capability to take oxygen out of the air and put it in its root area in order for it to be able to function properly. So other plants that do need oxygen start going by the wayside. Is this going? Okay. So what happens is there's all this parent material, right? Sand, silts, and clays. And the question that we need to be asking ourselves, does nature, like Jimmy said, does nature need fertilizers? No. We have more than enough nutrients in our soils at all times, but it's usually caught up in sand, silts, and clays. Sand, silts, and clays are basically crystalline structures. They're mineral structures that are holding enormous amounts of macronutrients, being nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then also enormous amounts of micronutrients, zinc, iron, magnesium, manganese, molybdenum, whatever your plant needs, it's there. The problem is the plants don't have a way to get to it. So how do they get to it? That's always the big question. So this is an interesting table. There was a study done by Sparks. I can't remember the guy's first name at the moment. I apologize about that. But he did a study in 2003. He went all over the planet and performed something called a geological assay. There are not many people who perform geological assays in the United States. As far as I know, I think Midwestern Labs is the only one. I don't know, Ward Labs may correct me. I don't know if they do too. But what they do is he collected samples from all over the planet, destroyed the actual crystalline structure, and then observed the nutrients or the elements in the soil. And what he found is that the median is more than enough for plants to grow for millennia. Because plants don't need a ton of nitrogen, they do need some. But what he found is that in the parent material, there's more than plenty. And in this one right here, this is agronomist recommended levels of plant available minerals, and that's typically what we want to add. Those are our inputs, right? That's our fertilizers. And then, but the issue is they also observed what the available nutrients are in an old growth forest, and these were the levels. But the old growth forest is fine, right? What makes this possible is biology. Biology goes in. Well, please work. There we go. Oh, skipping stuff. That makes me wonder if I'm still moving. Yeah, we're good. Okay. This picture was taken this year. This is a beach in Costa Rica, which you can see the beach. There's a lot of usually people say you can't grow things in mostly sand. There might be some silts and clays way down in there, but it's primarily sand, right? The only thing that makes this happen, like people say, well, the water holding capacity is 0. It's like, that's probably true. What happens when you put a lot of water in sand is it just goes right through it, right? But that's not necessarily the case if biology is present. They will hold that water. So this picture on your right here, your left, this was kind of a more coarse grass, obviously, as you can see, bunch grass, and it spreads rhizomonously. It sends out these runners, and then keeps coming up. But behind this picture, you can see these grasses right here. That's where the picture was taken, right here. And then there's this really luscious grass, and that was still primarily sand. And we actually observed that under the microscope. Oh, and one thing to mention, we do biological assessments. We'll talk a little bit more about that later at Living Soils Laboratory. It's our thing that we're doing right now. And you just don't expect to see this in sand. So to say you can't grow things because my soil's not loamy or it's not perfect is not true. It's blatantly false. What you need in place is biology. We're going to go into actual what is in your soil. Like, let's talk about bugs, basically. So the number one thing is always plant matter. We've been going over that ad nauseum. Anybody sick of it yet? To be talking about you always need to plant the root? It's okay to be honest. Yeah, and that's true. So if you do not have a plant in the ground, that plant is constantly feeding the soil, and the soil in regards to those carbon exudates we're putting in the soil, those are necessary to feed the first trophic level. And what feeds on those carbon exudates are bacteria and fungi, and then occasionally root-feeding nematodes. We'll go into that. They actually don't feed on the exudate, they feed on the root itself. So the bacteria and the fungi in that rhizosheath, that rhizosphere, they are constantly being asked by the plant, hey, I need micronutrients, macronutrients. They say, okay, I'll do this. It gets a contract for a nanogram of either a carbohydrate, a sugar, or amino acid or protein, right? And they say, okay, I'll get it for X amount, and I'll go find your magnesium. I'll go find your copper. And they get paid, they go find it, they bring it back. And then there's another cycle they've actually discovered is that plants, anybody think plants are vegetarians or vegans? Everybody ever heard of that? The plants are the most benign things on Earth. They actually ranch bacteria, and so it's called the rhizophagy cycle. It's discovered by a guy named James Smith. They're still trying to really figure the whole thing out, but what they do at the very tips of their roots, as they spread, they are collecting these bacteria and they'll absorb them. They'll strip them of their actual cell wall, and that has some nutrients in it, and then occasionally they'll eat the bacteria. They'll farm it and take it to the processor and take it up. It's mine now. So that's a fun thing to think about, that even your plants aren't vegan. I'm not saying you shouldn't eat your vegetables, folks. Eat your vegetables. But these bacteria and fungi are totally dependent on the plant, and without them, your plant, you can add all the macronutrients you need, and they will live. However, they're more susceptible to disease, they're more susceptible to frost, they're more susceptible to high temperatures. These organisms make the micronutrients available. Micronutrients are absolutely pivotal for secondary metabolism, which really produces a high level of nutrition in your plant. Without that, whether you're feeding cattle or you're eating a cauliflower or carrot, your plant is not necessarily high in nutrients. The United States comes in dead last when it comes to health amongst advanced countries. And that's, I think, due to our agriculture. Obviously, we all have responsibility because we choose what to eat. But that's, unfortunately, the way our agriculture is, that we do not foster these relationships. In our whole life, with the Savory Institute, they talk about holistic management. The social context is the most important. You don't have good relationships. It doesn't matter how good your farm or how good your ranch, everything starts falling apart. So these relationships we want to foster between these two. And that means always keeping a live root, always keeping your ground covered, etc. Now, when things really start to take off is when you can get the third trophic level in place. Third trophic level is having protozoa, nematodes, and microarthropods involved. And we're just going to dive into the actual morphology of these organisms. So we do assessments. We do biological assessments for people who are looking to find out what's actually in their soil, if they're leaning more fungal. We'll talk more about the fungal bacterial ratio. We do morphological counts of amoeba and protozoa in micrograms, 2 grams. We measure that out, and we tell you how many amoeba and protozoa and fungi and bacteria and nematodes are in your soils. Usually it's for folks who are trying to transition away and are wondering where their soil's at, and they kind of understand what the steps are to get there. And we can help them do that as well. So this is a Electron microscope image of compost. This compost, anybody have any idea what these things are? All these little tiny dots? And the big dots? I'm going to take a stab at it. Big dots, good guess, because they do look like bacteria. They look like a good. Those are fungal spores. The little dots right here. It's funny. You actually see some smooth ones right here, and then you see these circular bacteria called cocci. That's the classification for them. There's a lot of beneficial bacteria that are cocci. And then these ones right here that have these glues that look a little spiky. Everything under the soil that's a fungi or bacteria has something that it uses to bind itself. Typically, they're a little bit alkaline. Fungi lean a little more acidic in order to bind themselves to the actual parent material and start mining. They go to work. They're like folks from West Virginia just going down and going to go find some coal to burn, find some nutrients in order to bring up to the plant. Now, these strands right here, they're called Fungal Hyphae. Very much like a root system, but they're tiny, tiny, tiny. Normally can't see them. And as time goes on, you will either have a mushrooming body that's called a primordial that will come up through the soil, turn into the mushroom, release spores. Those are typically called basidiomycetes. Those are the higher level saprophytic fungi. When I say saprophytic, it eats dead stuff. Just eats all the things that are dead. Typically things that are high in carbon dead, not like dead bodies. Things like wood chips, leaves. A lot of them love oatmeal. I don't like oatmeal, but they do. Anybody like oatmeal in here? Good. You are a fungi in this kingdom. We need you guys. You're very important. And anyway, the soil is endlessly complex. We're just going to kind of get a little bit of a deeper understanding today. That's a really, really good question. So first, it depends on the quality of the manure. So it depends on what your animals are eating, right? So if your animals are eating a really, really robust grass hay that has really good soil biology, it's going to be much better than, say, a monocrop alfalfa that's been sprayed, etc. But there's a lot of nitrogen in that manure. Oh, that's fabulous. Wood chips are excellent. So wood chips are, you want fungal dominated bacteria. So so you have turkeys, you're saying? Turkeys. So that's interesting. So manure is typically high nitrogen. We'll get into this a little bit later, but turkeys are a little bit high nitrogen. All manures are high nitrogen. So the interesting thing about turkeys and the monogastrics is that their gullets don't have as much as, say, a cow. A healthy cow has, I think, like 150 different species of bacteria in their manure and 20 species of Basidio and Ascomyces. So it depends on the animal, but if you're adding all that carbon, it's excellent. That's an excellent thing to put on your soils. It does help to compost it. We'll get into why. It's just a little bit slower of a process. And if you can keep your ground covered with that, like, so if you're putting that out in the field and you're growing something, knock it over, that's a great thing to put on your soil. It will become fungal dominated over time. Does that answer your question? Okay. So these are a bunch of different types of fungi. So who here, before they heard about fungi, thought fungi are a bad thing? It's okay to be honest. No? Okay, cool. So, anybody heard of the Irish potato famine? Yeah, not a good situation. We got a lot of people migrating here because of that. You know, it's actually quite fast. The United States got a lot of our immigration, a lot of people coming here, probably my family included, because of poor agricultural situations in Europe. Plus religious freedom, but there's always everything's more complex. There's never one reason. There's no silver bullets for anything. And then the funny thing is, Western expansion. Anybody know what fueled Western expansion other than you could go get free land? Why would you need free land? Grow food. But so you know what was happening on the East Coast at that time period? So they're growing a lot of tobacco and a lot of other things. The soil fertility started to decline. So they said, go west, young man, go west. Everybody heard that before? And we continually went west, plowed it up, and everybody's booming, right? You have this incredible soil fertility. And over time with the management practices, and you know, I don't ever want to say anything. It's not, our grandfathers weren't doing anything unusual. This has been happening through human history for thousands of years. Humans just kind of go to places, plow it up, and then kind of like, oh, we got a problem. Occasionally things get better, occasionally things get worse. So this right here is an omycete. Omycetes are pathogenous fungi that typically cause things like powdery mildew, blights, rusts, and you do not want those. Those occur in, everybody remember when I was talking about aerobic conditions and how important those are? These show up in more anaerobic conditions. The less amount of oxygen you have, the more likely you are to get pathogens in your soil that are going to damage potentially your animal or your plant. Or you. E. coli and all those things are Shigella, Pasteurella, Salmonella, those are all anaerobic bacteria classifications. The one on the right, the C right here, that is a beneficial fungi. The way that you can tell is that it's a wider diameter. It has a more uniform diameter of the actual width, and it also has these little. Anybody see the little lines in those? Those are called septa. Very high indicator of a beneficial fungi, being saprophytic or mycorrhizal. And then these are germinating spores right here. Beginnings of them, they're probably detrimental. When you see these kinds of weird lines in there, it's usually not a great thing. This right here is another good one. These two guys are spores. Anybody have what are they called, the stink caps, or when the mushrooms come out and you see all this, it's like dust on the ground. It's probably more than 1 billion, if not 1 trillion spores coming out. It looks just like this, potentially like that. I don't know that one. For this image, I was questioning whether that's a spore. That looks like a dormant cilia or amoeba to me. Yes, omycetes are what those are called, and typically they're like the molds, that kind of thing. Yeah. So that's your indicator. So this looks clean, right? It's uniform. The diameter is fairly the same. The septa, those are all key indicators that those are beneficial. When you see it looks like oozy, it's just kind of. Nothing's uniform. It's just it doesn't look good, right? And those are they're searching for things, right? Those are enzymes that's emitting in order to try to find something to bring into itself to build its body. Kind of disgusting. You don't want to see those under a microscope. You always feel bad when you do. We've experienced every kind of disease possible in our greenhouse because we're just like a It's weird because Utah's a desert and it becomes a Mediterranean climate. It's really humid. All kinds of magic shows up and it's kind of a problem. So it's been it's exactly that many times. Yeah, it's not, and it's like, well, I took it from this cucumber plant. You can take a leaf and you put it in a water solution, kind of suspend it, and you look at it. It's like, oh, great, I have mycetes. No wonder the plant's dying. You only got one cucumber out of it. And usually a cucumber plant and a thing like that should get 40 cucumbers a plant, like, per month. So it's, yeah. Only reason like this is important to me is because we've had bad experiences. This has come through not using good soil management. I thought and you think you are, right? And then nature will tell you. So this is very important. Anybody here spread mineral on their soils on a regular basis? Anybody know why you keep having to do that? I mean, remember how we all those nutrients are available in the soil. So the problem is, if your fungi are not present, you're saying you need to keep adding lime. You need to keep adding some form of calcium or magnesium in order to flocculate the soils, open it up a little bit. The fungi are not there. The fungi acts as a net to catch it. So as the fungi age, they start forming things on the hyphal strands called oxalate crystals. And those oxalate crystals are catching and forming around those fungi, and that makes it more available to the plant. So there was a study done where they added a bunch of lime to some soil, and it was high quality, just potting soil, right? And they added a bunch into it, and they started to measure. They poured a bunch of water, and they measured how long it took to leach out, and all of it leached out very quickly. And then they put a fungal-dominated soil in there, and only 5% leached out. So fungi are absolutely integral to keeping your minerals in place, especially the available minerals, and those are the ones we want to spread, right? So fungi are absolutely pivotal. And we can talk about the actual carbon. It's a form of calcium, that they're holding on to. If the plant needs it, they'll say, hey, I got it. And the plant roots are also all entangled in this, most likely. So if there's a plant root, say, hey, I need that. Thanks. Pay them in a nice sugar dollop, and yeah, those are the Electron microscopes are amazing. I wish I had one, but they're only like $500,000. I know, right? I need to sell more cattle. That's one day. So everybody heard of Microrizal Fungi? Yes, lots of that around here. Very important. It's a great inoculum. If you're growing, anybody do market garden systems here or have a garden, So if you can buy some inoculates that have the best one is, I think it's called Bioorganics, is the one that I found that I like the most. If you put in your starts, put a little dusting of one that's called Mycorrhizal Fungi. We'll talk about that. You can also mix that with a compost tea or extract. That is somewhat beneficial because once those get in contact with roots, they will start infecting the roots. When you say infect, anybody have a good feeling when I say infection site? I don't. I have bad skin, so I get these melanomas all over my I have a lot of moles, and anyway, it kind of reminds me of that for whatever reason. But this is beneficial, right? So, sorry. So, bioorganics. It comes with like 15 or 16 different species. There's two types. There's one called Mycorrhizal fungi and another called Mycorrhizal fungi. The Mycorrhizal are typically better for more of your landscaping trees. And the reason for that is, especially with conifers, they do not actually have a symbiotic relationship with the Mycorrhizal fungi. The Mycorrhizal fungi kind of interact with the cell membranes more of the cell surfaces of the plant root. They do not infect it. And those act as basically an extra root system. They're sourcing a lot of the needs of large trees and landscaping trees. Mycorrhizal fungi are typically much more common amongst grasses, vegetables. Brassica do not need them, so your cold kill crops don't interact with them, which is We'll talk about that in a minute. Legumes don't. They interact with another species of bacteria, Rhizobium, Azotobacter, Azospirillum, things like that. But anyway, these are very, very important. These fungi are fascinating. They give their all for plants. So even if they do get infected and the fungi, for whatever reason, dies, what they do is they're called arbuscules, right? Which, because on the inside of the root, they actually look like arbuscules, they look like little trees that are coming out. Just this whole extra root system. And as they die, the actual arbuscules, and you can see these infection sites right up in here. As they die, they actually release more nutrients to the tree itself. And another cool thing, I'm not a huge fan of socialism in the pure sense, but in nature, I think it's very fascinating. As a plant starts growing, and it has a fungal relationship, the fungi are helping it get to wherever it needs. But once that plant is healthy and it has most of what it needs, the plant is forced to pay the piper more for the nutrients. It needs more sugar to pay, and guess what it does with that sugar? Often what happens is, say, the mycorrhizal fungi is connected to another plant. The other plant is maybe not as healthy as the other plant. So that other plant that's weak is then helped by this other plant and by the fungi. So the fungi prioritizes the weak plant if it's a healthy plant. So I thought that's kind of fascinating. It's a little bit of a social democracy going on there. Not that I'm advocating for it, but you want... No, it is. So he's still paying. Yeah, there's still... Yes. I don't know the question. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. The answer is no. Thanks, Jill. Looking forward to your keynote speaking today. You know, that's a good question. These mycorrhizal fungi spores require roots to germinate. So the question would be, do those spores go down into the soil and actually interact with those roots? And I think that would be dependent upon the health of your soil, which... What's your... That's not a bad idea. Yeah. That would be better. That would, yeah. So yes. So that's one of the best things you can do. There's a couple of different ways you can kind of rig a drip system behind your no-till drill to go into the furrows themselves, and put that right in with it. That's really, because all of these organisms, maybe with the exception of the third trophic level of protozoa and amoeba, need the seed or the plant in order to exist. But then it's kind of, it's one step removed, because those organisms, the higher trophics, require that the other ones are present. So, any other questions? These questions are great. Awesome. So we're going to go into the higher trophics. So these are testate amoeba right here. These are kind of my favorite, because they create these unique, these are called tests. They're like, I kind of like to think of them as hermit crabs a little bit. Maybe you've seen a hermit crab. They have these really unique shells that they assemble around themselves, and they live inside. They come out, they use something called a pseudopod and grab bacteria and bring them in and eat them. Kind of fun. And these are called naked amoeba. I've seen these on surfaces of plants, and there's some pretty interesting studies about how beneficial that these organisms on the surfaces of plants are in order to deter pests. Anyway, these guys just kind of ooze around, and they're kind of fun too. We'll talk about what these do and why they're so important. These are flagellates, many different species of flagellates. And these, by the way, all these organisms, these higher trophics, are extremely sensitive to tillage. And and this is my opinion, I could be wrong, I'm willing to eat my words, but without the presence of livestock or replacing it with some kind of inoculum that's living, and usually you can't get that in a bottle, just so you know. I could be wrong, there may be people with technology that are figuring that out, but these organisms are larger and they just have a hard time with tillage, they don't survive it. Lots of different kinds. This one right here in the bottom right-hand corner has a bunch of, it's called a stellate flagellate. And the flagellates are getting their names from their flagella that, yeah, go ahead. Yes, you can. That's a good question. You could do that. You can spray it on this. If your soil has any form of infiltration, just spraying it on the surface is good enough as well. You want to be really careful about what kind of tank you use. If your tank has had any kind of inorganic fertilizers or chemicals in it, that tank usually will hinder the amount of fun. Like if you have a really good compost tea or extract that you put in there, that can be a problem. So if you're going to venture in this world, you kind of want to make sure you have two separate tanks for that kind of a thing. But you could, your pump is very important. It's pivotal. Yes, so too much pressure would kill them. Also, right angles. So if your piping is at right angles, so you have a right angle pipe, all of that force, of the pressure of the water, or the solution, or the suspension that you have, they get slammed into that, and then it keeps going out, you're going to lose a lot. There's all kinds of little nuance here. You had a question there? Yeah. Yeah, so again, it depends on the quality of the manure. This is my opinion. It's better to compost it if you can. But I know that's a lot. That's a lot of extra steps and it's a lot, especially if you're going to do it right. Straw would help. I mean, adding organic matter to your soil, in my opinion, is always a good thing to do. That's correct. Yeah, I like straw. It's pretty high in carbon, and the thing you want diversity not only in you want all of these, but you want a lot of these in different species inside of the functional classes. So straw, for example, a great thing to have, but that's only for a certain type of fungi. There may be 5 or 6 or 20 different types of fungi that eat that, but you also want the kinds that like to eat the wood-loving, the saprophytic who love to eat wood. The others that like to there's others that like to eat oatmeal. They like to eat just straight up oats, and so there's all kind. You want to kind of mix that up if you can, but adding organic matter is always depending on the quality of your manure, because sometimes high in salt. Yeah, and if you can get it covered, even better. Flagellates are fun. Ciliates. These guys are called. They're like race cars. Under a microscope, these guys will go all the way across a cover slip in about 4 seconds, which is really fast. These guys tend to be facultative, anaerobes and aerobes. It's okay to see some of these in your soil, but if you start seeing a lot, you're probably starting to head towards a lack of oxygen. They eat a lot of fungi. So all of these organisms we just talked about, the flagellates, the amoeba, and the ciliates, they eat a large amount of bacteria, and somewhere in around 10,000 bacteria a day. And we'll talk about why that's important here in just 1 second. Nematodes. Anybody want to hear about, anybody not like hearing the word nematode? Anybody had issues with nematodes? Doesn't happen very often in Utah, but it happens a lot in Idaho. Typically people, when you think of nematodes, are thinking of the parthenogenic kinds. That's, I think, an unfair characterization. It's just really what the food they like. This is called a root-feeding nematode. And you can tell, you see this little spear right here? He'll take his spear, inject it into the actual root of the plant and start sucking the life out of that root. And if you get too many of them, they will greatly hurt your plant. So that's really, when people talk about nematodes, that's usually what they're talking about in traditional ag. But nematodes are absolutely pivotal. I can't express this enough about how important these are for nutrient cycling. And there's different kinds. There's bacterial feeding nematodes, which they just thrash a lot underneath the microscope. They're just throwing their heads everywhere looking for bacteria. And then you have the fungal feeding, which are absolutely pivotal as well. The fungal feeders will suck cytoplasm out of hyphal strands and then excrete out the back. We'll talk about what they excrete. And sometimes there are fungi who actually protect themselves. They create little traps for these fellers. And what they do is, once they get around them, once the nematode goes inside, they expand with some kind of cytoplasm or whatever, molecules that make up the liquid of a fungi that's inside of it. And then all of a sudden, it's trapped, it starts drilling inside of that nematode, sucks out all the nutrients. See you later, nematode. But if you want to really control these root feeders, you need predatory nematodes. Predatory nematodes are twice or three times the size of typical nematodes. And the one D right there, that's a big tooth. And once they get their mouth around a nematode, those nematodes are toast. They can't get out. So diversity in soil is very, very important. You don't just want bacteria. You don't just want fungi. You want the whole community. Anybody know what this guy is? Water bear. Anybody know anything about the water bears? They're fun. I've seen one in my life, which I felt very honored. It was in my worm castings, which I was like just ecstatic to see. He was clearer than this too. He had a little bit better skin. This one's a little too mottled, in my opinion. Water bears are some of the most resilient creatures on the planet. They will go dormant very easily in unsavory conditions, but these are, there's just a lot of organisms. When you get into the microarthropods, to be honest, I'm not as familiar with the morphological conditions of the microarthropods, but there's crustaceans, insects. Technically, an aphid is a microarthropod, and those organisms are actually quite important to the system as you start tending more and more and more fungal. We'll talk about fungi here in a second, but nitrogen cycle. This is really important. So all those organisms are eating bacteria, eating fungi. And what they excrete is absolutely pivotal. It's NH4 ammonium. But ammonium only typically stays in your soil when it's fungal dominated, because fungi excrete acids, organic acids that tend to keep the soil a little bit acidic. Just a little bit. And just so you know, with pH, if you have soil, millimeter by millimeter by millimeter, pH will change dramatically depending on the context of the soil, depending on what organisms are there. They're creating their own environments. Like us, I'm going to build a different house than somebody else. Somebody's going to build a different house. Everything's going to be different depending on the context. It's the same thing that they're doing underneath the ground. So typically, it starts with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. That's the rhizobium and the azotobacter and the azospirillum. They infect, those are legumes, right? So the clovers, the peas, very, very important. But the problem is, a lot of that nitrogen, there's kind of a misnomer, is that nitrogen is being spread through the soil. That's not 100% true. Those plants worked really hard to get that nitrogen. It's likely they're going to hold on to most of it. They may give out a little bit, but they're going to hold on to a lot. And what happens is that plant uses it to build its body. Plant dies, it gets grazed, something poops, there's some kind of disturbance, and it dies. And then the decomposers come along, the bacteria and the fungi, and they do what they do. They're feeding the plant. They're, building up their bodies. But then you have the predators. Predators are important. If holistic management with livestock, predator-prey relationship, pivotal. In the soil, same thing, absolutely important. The protozoa, nematodes, and microarthropods will eat all of those bacteria every day of their lives, excrete NH4. If your soil's fungally dominated, it stays ammonium. And that's the regenerative system, this one right here. If you don't have that, it's kind of hard to keep yourself regenerative in the mineral cycle. And the way to do that is with either composting or livestock. I've examined some livestock saliva, tons of amoeba, quite a few flagellates, haven't seen any nematodes. And so that's quite important. So this one right here, very, very important. Sometimes that NH4 gets taken up by nitrifying bacteria. I can't remember, it's like Nitrosomonas, I think are what they're called. And there's another one, I think, I can't remember what it's called, yeah. NH4 is ammonium. Mm-hmm. And then NO3 is nitrate, and we'll talk about nitrate a little bit more. And the differences, what kind of happens in the biological succession. So, talk about this ad nauseum this week. The water cycle, pivotal for this. If you don't have these organisms, your plants can't transpirate as well. You're losing the water cycle. So this is just a little bit deeper. Go through that real fast. That modeled area here is really, really important. Those are the organisms chomping through that modeled area, getting to better drained soil. So those organisms will help, with the help of the plants, exuding exudates, create more of that, get the aeration out. Plant succession, this is really important. Anybody ever wonder why, when you disturb the soil, the weeds come up? Why doesn't the grass just come back? So what happens is you're exposing a lot of air to a lot of bacteria. Bacteria typically like to multiply when they're exposed to a lot of air, and they eat everything around them. And they tend to have a lot of nitrates, and nitrates are taken up by weeds. And weeds basically are helping the soil try to move up. I don't know if they are acting like I'm going to help. I don't need a deciduous tree coming here. But for whatever reason, they take up a lot of nitrogen. And as you slowly get more fungal dominated, as those weeds fall over, die, they're the fodder for fungi. And as it keeps going and going and going, depending on your moisture, you start getting the early grasses and brassica. And those brassica, they don't need fungi, but they seem to do better when there's just about a third amount of fungi as there are bacteria. As you keep going up a level, vegetables, 0.75, a lot of your vegetables that you want are around 0.75 fungi to bacteria, so you're still slightly more fungal dominated. And as you get to the perennial grasses and row crops, it's equal. I would contend that the perennial bunch grass is like more fungi. And as you keep going up, all the way to old growth forests, you're completely fungal dominated. Anybody been out to an old forest and you kind of dig underneath some pine needles or some leaves and it's just white? Fungal dominated. So this is me and my dad. We were trying to do a small batch compost this year in like 16-degree temperatures, kind of a challenge. But we got it up to 165 degrees. The issue we thought we needed more nitrogen than the typical recipe. Not the case. We had really hot fungi, and this ended up turning anaerobic. We had to terminate it and start over. Composting properly is actually quite complex. We could talk about composting for a while. Please go forward. Okay. Basically, you want to get it hot. I mean, you can compost properly over quite a few weeks. But the best way is to get it hot, 165 degrees for 24 hours, turn it twice, get it up to 165 degrees. Turn it once, get it up to 165 again, and then turn it one more time, 165 degrees for 24 hours, and then let it age. That's really the way to do it. This is the recipe we use. Fairly common. High carbon are things that are high in structure. Straw, wood chips, leaves. Nitrogen would be the green material. Really good haze, really great. And then I can't express it if you're going to go into this, how important it is to keep your pile at 50% moisture. The way to tell is if you take a handful of it, squeeze it, and if a drop or two comes out, you are at 50% moisture. If 10 or 20 drops come out, you are too high, you will go anaerobic, it will smell like death. And when compost smells bad, it's off-gassing all of the nutrients you want to keep. So it's pivotal that you keep it aerobic. There's a lot of nuance to this. If you have more questions, feel free to ask me a little bit later. How do we do this in a different context? Market gardens. My favorite way to do it is layering. I understand if you're doing 10 acres of vegetables, it's a little bit more of a challenge to do layering. It's very hard, but usually adding a lot of mulch at the beginning. I use cardboard because it's a good weed barrier and it disappears as fungal food. That will help your weeds disappear. And then just keep adding, start adding the browns and the leaves, keep it more fungally dominated. I don't like this with the grass clippings and vegetable scraps. Vegetable scraps are fine. Actually, I'd rather you compost it, but the grass clippings are going to have some seeds in it. Don't want to do that. My opinion is get some okay compost, even biosolids, which are not my preferred method, from the municipality would be better just to start planting into. You want to soak your cardboard, by the way, otherwise it'll just kind of have a problem. This is a larger version of that. You can tell there's no bare ground. The Victorian gardens that United States gardeners have based our model on is not great. You're leaving that soil bare, it's a problem. It's gonna, a lot of your organisms are gonna suffer. Row crops, Jimmy's talked about this a lot, which is awesome. Depending on whether you have livestock or not, you can use a roller crimper. That's that big red thing right there. Terminate your cover crop, seed right into it. He actually has an inoculum right there that goes with it. It's a great way to do row cropping. Another image of that, really thick, drilling into rye. Livestock. If you don't have access to composting is time consuming. It's a challenge. I contend that every human being on Earth should properly know how to compost because that's a lot of our waste is causing a lot of problems. But if you don't have access to cattle, if you do have access to cattle, this is the other way to get your soil life back into place because of the active nature which they graze and their slobber. There's a lot of nuance to grazing. And I know there's a lot of grazers in here, but it's just that constant movement and giving a lot of rest to the ground is absolutely pivotal. I'm a big, big fan of livestock. I'm more adept at livestock than I am. The market garden's a new thing for me. It's a little bit more of a challenge. Livestock tend to manage themselves, which I like that to some degree. They're great. Any kind of livestock. The only thing with sheep is that they're a little bit more curious about the fences, so they're a little bit more management intensive. We are looking to get into sheep. Big fan of sheep. If you have degraded soils, it's, in my opinion, better to start with sheep than it is with cattle because they seem to select out weeds and more than cattle will. I'm a big fan of sheep, especially the hair sheep. We're going to have to shear them or deal with their feet. No, there's no versus, but they will. If you can do both, that's best, in my opinion. Especially if you're like in a virgin area that's beautiful and perfect, then you don't need to put it in compost. But livestock are really what you want. If you can't compost, you gotta incorporate life that's actively has life in it, in their manure, their urine, their slobber. Otherwise, I don't know how you can get your soil back to having these higher trophic organisms. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question? This was a big ranch in Alabama that I took a video of that has 400 head that they're moving. This was just an example. You guys have seen stuff like this already. Oh. How many head do you have here? It's just 250, huh? 450 actually. 40 acres. I just thought it was cool to see all the birds. Oh, you shut up, the whole group. A lot there. Anyway. So these are all the principles we've been talking about. The soil is, this is because of the soil. If you don't do these, your soil's going to suffer. Those organisms are going to suffer. Keep doing that. This is our lab. If you guys have questions or I love talking about this. I could die talking about this kind of stuff to my grave. So if you have questions or you're looking for assessments, just give us a call or check us out on Instagram or whatever. doing all that nonsense. Anyway, anybody have any questions? I think we got maybe time for a couple. Great. Perfect. Thank you guys for your time. Alrighty.
All right, thanks, McKinley. Now we're going to go over to the main Entrada A and B for the welcome with Emily 5.